This is Support is Sexy, episode 566, with Kate Harvie, author of Believe It and Behave It, How to Restart, Reset, and Reframe Your Life. Welcome to Support is Sexy. I'm your host, Elayne Fluker, entrepreneur, author, and founder of Chic Rebellion Media. 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, I bring you inspiring women entrepreneurs who share their wins and lessons to help you take your business to the next level. Here we go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Support is Sexy. I'm happy to have you here. It just would not be the same without you. And on this episode, I am happy to bring to you Kate Harvie. And Kate is the author of the book, Believe It and Behave It. And one of the things that Kate said that really stuck with me is life doesn't throw stuff at us. It throws stuff to us. And Kate knows what it means to have stuff thrown at you. She is a survivor of a traumatic brain injury, and she talks about going through that experience. She tells us about that, but also for everyone who goes through a traumatic experience, whatever that is, even if it's not a brain injury, whatever that experience is, she talks about how to restart your life and reclaim your life, even after everything seems like it's completely falling apart, like everything has changed, like nothing will ever be the same. She talks more about that in her book, of course, but shares that with us in this episode. And she talks about the importance of, when those moments do seem crazy, getting a bit quiet. And I'm all about that. Sometimes you just got to be quiet and give yourself some time and some space. So I know you're going to enjoy this conversation. Without further ado, Kate Harvie. So Kate, thank you so much for joining us for an episode of Support is Sexy. I'm happy to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. So our first question, when did you first fall in love with entrepreneurship?
I fell in love with entrepreneurship when I failed the bar exam. That's back in the fourth quarter, 1999. Now, while I didn't pursue my own business or seek a job at a small business then, having to start from scratch and apply a wildly different approach to everything laid the groundwork for me to become an entrepreneur and work with and for those who run small businesses.
Now, when you failed the bar exam, when you first realized that happened, I don't know how that happens. Do you get a letter in the mail or something?
Correct.
When you first realized it, what were the thoughts that went through your mind? Was it, oh my goodness, what am I going to do now? Or do you just take it again? As I know a lot of people fail the first couple of times.
I thought two things. One, in my lack of surprise was important because it prevented me from completely freaking out. And because I'd never been particularly happy in law school and that I had always really struggled to fit everywhere I worked, other than the not-for-profit work that I did, where it put me was, okay, you sensed this was going to be the result. Now what? And for the first time in a long time, I was a little bit quiet. I mean, obviously people knew, my classmates, because the way bar exam results are announced, the local newspaper prints a list. And if your name's not on the list, you didn't pass. So that's how you initially find out. And then the state sends everyone a letter. So for me to have to be quiet in my head for a little while was good.
It was good. Yeah. More of us need to take time to do that, right? Before getting some bad news in the mail, even just taking a moment to get quiet.
It's difficult because as much as we know we need to act, we often will react. And that can not delay necessarily and maybe mess up how we ultimately can come out of something. Right. But we're women. So, we roll with it. We know what that is.
Now, tell us your background and where you grew up.
I was born in New York City. We moved to Cleveland when I was very little for my father's job. I came back to New York for college, and other than a year in London during that, in Cleveland for law school, and then I lived 2 years in St. Louis. I've lived in New York most of my life. By background, you mean where I went to school or work?
Well, really more so, how would you describe yourself as a young person? growing up
sure.
in New York and Cleveland?
As a young person, I was rambunctious. I was interested in other people and things. I wanted to learn about cooking, music, photography, and how things were designed and constructed. And that's from Lincoln Logs, building blocks, Legos.
What do you think drew you to how things were designed?
I don't know, other than the why and the how were always the unanswered questions.
Mm-hmm.
Get the where, we get the what, we get the when. Yet, how did it exist? How did it come to be? And maybe growing up, the toys that we had and the way things were taught in school, it's about putting together logic, learning cursive.
Which they don't teach anymore, right?
My understanding from the core curriculum is that most public schools no longer teach cursive, which concerns me, but hopefully there's other ways for children's minds to develop in, funky, interesting ways.
Yeah. Now, did you always know, even though I know you went into law, was there a part of you, I should say, that always knew you'd be interested in entrepreneurship at some point?
Not in the slightest. Ever.
So you were really thrown then when you didn't get the law degree, get past the bar at that time. Absolutely.
Growing up as I did and raised as my brother and I were, we were encouraged to live what I call the linear life, which is born, you go to school, perhaps you serve in the military, you work, you meet someone, you marry, you have children, you send them to school, and it's a fairly consistent cycle of what we can expect, how we interact, how we exact, how we provide. And my first wrench to that was failing the bar. And so for the first time, I needed to really and truly start from scratch. And at the time, what did not occur to me was starting my own business, probably because it was risky enough not to take the bar again and not to apply to be a legal assistant and not to continue any work in the legal community. And so for me, I thought, well, this is crazy enough, yet relevant enough, because as a strategist, you know this, how you analyze, how you advocate, how you research, they help you form the method, the magic, the marketing of what you'll do.
So what was your first step then once you decided, okay, I'm not going to continue with law, I'm going to do X? What was X for you at that time?
X for me was working in advertising. Happily and blessedly, a friend was working at an agency that she really liked. And I opted to, be selective who I told that I had, not, of course, everyone knew I didn't pass the bar. And then question, what do I do? I was selective who I told I was going to flip the script there. And long story short, the agency was looking for a consultant to work on a project for Cargill. I interviewed for it, got it, did that work, and then began to work for the agency full-time officially in the following year.
Why was it important for you, do you think, at that time or even reflecting now, to be selective with who you told what your next move was going to be?
I'm pretty sure I was selective who I told for two reasons. One, I was so frustrated with myself and judging and self-hating that I didn't want to hear that from any more people than I was already hearing it from. Number one. Number two, everyone means well, when they give you advice, when they tell you something, when they care, and unless they have experienced it themselves or they're drawing from their strong place of empathy, often it's just talk. It's not mean talk. It's not wrong talk. It's not effective talk. It's not helpful talk. And with so much noise in my head between regret and frustration and looking back and who the heck knows what I'm going to do, I was not able to bear well much more noise. Thus, I was really conscious who I told.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. That's so powerful. And I think it goes back to what you said earlier about the importance of being quiet or getting quiet and sort of allowing your own thoughts. Well, you, like you said, too, you already having probably your own fears or other kinds of thoughts, and to add to that quote unquote noise for everyone to catch. I want to help all our listeners to catch. It's not necessarily, maybe you can get help from, like you said, selective people, but sometimes you just don't need all that noise. You need to get quiet and figure out what feels like the next move before you share with everyone. So I think thank you so much for sharing that.
Oh, you're welcome. No, church. I mean, isn't it interesting how when we're doing it, it doesn't feel like a lesson, you know? It happens, we make it, we create it, we co-create it. And it's only later when we have an opportunity to reflect or fix, when we remember, oh yeah, I know this.
Right.
I did this. I lived this.
Right. It's funny. I was talking to, she was my former therapist, but now I've been talking to her again, actually. Had a conversation with this woman, Patty is her name. She's lovely, in New York also. But I was telling her about my, I'm traveling quite a bit over the next year and away from my parents who are elderly, healthy, thank goodness, I always say, but still elderly in Atlanta. So I worry about them. In any case, I was telling her there are certain things that happen that I don't tell them because I feel like I want to, protect them. I don't want them to be afraid or just whatever. It doesn't matter what it is, going to a dangerous country or, obviously I'm an adult, but they're still your parents. And
or their child.
Yeah, they're in their 80s, so they're going to worry naturally. But something she told me that your story reminded me of, she said, you're not protecting them, you're protecting yourself.
Ooh.
I know, Kate. Heavy. I had not thought of it that way. I was like, oh, and I should, for everyone to catch, she also said, and that's okay. Because sometimes that could make people feel guilty, like, oh, I'm actually not telling them because I'm protecting myself. She was saying, no, that's okay. You have to know, just like you said, what you can share or when you can share with even well-meaning people, which you also said. Sometimes you just got to block out that noise, and it is a way to protect yourself in that moment. It's not even necessarily about, in my case, wasn't as much about them as I thought. It was about me, and I needed to be okay knowing, no, I need to protect my own space, sanity, etc. So I just wanted to mention from the other side of that.
No, thank you. I mean, gospel. What Patty said and what you knew in your heart of hearts and what you know in your heart of hearts when you opt not to tell your parents something that they may respond heavy to is intention and perception don't always play together. We may mean all the good, all the love, all the soul in the world, and we can't help how someone's going to take what we say. So in an effort to protect people, sometimes we shift or we reframe what we want to tell them, or we don't tell them at all, right? Because we know them. And history has shown us that they could be this way about it. So I said this to someone once and they said, well, then you don't trust anybody. And I said, well, I don't know if it's not trusting people. It's being aware of who they are and how they can be. So in all the ways you can, you are showing love. That's right. By both telling and keeping to yourself. At least that's how I take what you told me about your family.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I hope what you just said, I wrote it down as a quote, intention and perception don't always play well together. Yes, excellent.
That's my life.
That's your life, exactly.
I wrote a book about it.
You did write a book about it. That's what I want to talk about next, actually. Tell us about your book, why it was important for you really to write your book, Believe It, Behave It.
So it was important for me to write Believe It and Behave It because, Brene Brown said it. Trauma is trauma. And everyone at some point needs to put the pieces back together. And it does not need to be as difficult as it appears to be and as it is initially. For me, when I was knee deep in the immediate recovery, its aftermath, and the subsequent when I was better, I was a straight mess. Okay. I'm not embarrassed to share that. I'm not ashamed of it. Anyone who knows me, including my family, they may have different vernacular for it, and they will confirm I was a disaster.
Mm-hmm.
And what I could not find, what I could not feel, what I could not learn, I decided to make something that could be that. And as a friend of mine who works at my high school said to me, it's turning trauma into a teaching tool.
Mm.
And so I decided a blueprint, not a direction, a blueprint that could nudge people and empower them and support them as they tackle whatever happens. I also learned that life's going to throw stuff at us. But then I learned it's not that life throws at us, it throws to us.
Mm.
We're going to take it. And maybe we're going to flip it. Maybe we're going to make brownies with it. Maybe we're going to plant it. And it's not going to knock us down.
Right. Now tell us about the traumatic experience that you went through that put you in this place where, as you said, you were a mess for a little while.
Sure. I stepped into the crosswalk to retrieve my hat that the wind had blown off my head. And I was struck by an ambulance that was passing. Now, the irony of that is not lost on anybody. So that left me with multiple skull fractures, brain contusions, and I went into a coma not long after for a couple of weeks plus. Now, the extent of the neurological damage, including intracranial pressure and something that thus requiring me to have half of my skull replaced and a bunch of surgeries, by New York law, if you suffer certain kind of neurological trauma, when you're released from medical care, it's illegal to live alone.
Wow.
So for the first time since I was 14, I lived at my parents' house, who live in Ohio.
What was that like, having to go back home?
Our parents had moved from the house where my brother and I were raised a few years prior. So their home was not my home.
Mm-hmm.
And I did all I could to make it my home, because I had said for years when I used to travel a lot for work, so long as you're surrounded by the people and the programs and the places that mean something to you, anything can be home. Now that is true. And it's also Hallmark talk, unless you really and truly believe it.
Right.
So while I was not allowed to drive and I could not work, and I had not a memory in my head from everything from how to drive to how to make brownies, I was quiet, yet all over the place. And in trying to make routines that I could feel good about, in making the effort to reconnect with friends, to make new friends, to accept the body that I now had. Because as part of me was really happy because I was so thin. I mean, 3 months in a hospital, though, anyone's going to become thin.
Right. Were you in a coma that whole time?
No, 2.5 weeks in the coma.
Mm-hmm.
And I came out of that, was in that hospital for a little while, and then transferred to another one at the beginning of March.
There were times when they didn't think you were going to make it, right?
Correct. Mm-hmm. Times that they didn't think I was going to make it. And then I only learned this around the time I was during the writing of my book. And I'm glad I didn't learn it until then. Apparently, I was in such a bad way that they needed to have someone sleep in the room with me overnight because there was concern I would harm myself.
Really? So what was the, I know it's considered traumatic brain injury is what it is called, right? For the medical term. So what was the, I don't even know how to ask the question.
You're fine. Go ahead.
Was it something, the part of your brain that was injured, did it cause things like you might want to hurt yourself? You know what I mean? Like they say with football.
No, it's a good question.
Example, they get hit so many times in a certain part, so it makes them super aggressive. And that, so I'm wondering, was it where you were hit in your head or the kind of injury? What made these kind of things be a concern for the medical teams?
So I was hit so hard that I was knocked down the street. And in the multiple skull fractures that happened, they caused contusions to my brain, which is different than a concussion.
Okay.
So my brain was swelling. And when the brain swells so much that there's what they call intracranial pressure, your life is threatened. And so it was because of that they removed part of my skull. Now, once the pressure was subsided, then they needed to keep eyes on other things. And for me, that was a subdural hematoma. And they needed to take a look at that. And there was respiratory failure with me. So I had to get a tracheotomy and what's called an intravenous filter implant, or an IVF, so you can breathe properly. So apparently my cognition was so disrupted that I couldn't speak. And I was disoriented and confused and was not able to retain information from minute to minute. And my cognition was so poor. Again, this is measured, I think, by both, the frontal parietal and all the different areas of the brain and my behavior, that they had a sitter with me for 24 hours a day so I would not be at risk to myself. And Elayne, I'll tell you this, I wish so much that I had memories of anything. I don't have any memories of the year this happened, which was 2009. I remember the day it happened, the lead up to it, and I remember a month and a half following that. I was laying in a bed, woke up, and there was my brother sitting there. My brother was living in Boston. And I said, "Hey, what's up?" And he said, "Do you know where you are?" And I looked around and I said, "Well, I'm not at home." So I've decided that it's a blessing that I don't have much recollection of the majority of the surgeries, because who knows what I would have thought, what I would have done, tried to force myself out of the bed, probably. So I talk a lot about humble and how it keeps us balanced. I didn't know just how appropriate it was that I was so humble until I learned until I reviewed thoroughly my medical records. Apparently, when I was discharged from the second hospital, my memory abilities compared to women my age at the time I was 33 were so below the first percentile. That level of performance is similar to what is seen in intellectually disabled people. So I am extra grateful that I can do crossword puzzles now, and I can read a whole book, and I remember recipes, people's birthdays, to be sure to put gas in the car,
right,
etc.
Things that we take for granted so often, and then it could almost all be gone just like that. And in an instant where you were doing something as simple as grabbing your hat from the crosswalk. You just never know what the moment is going to be.
Absolutely. And in traveling so much and seeing so many places around this world, I know you are so cognizant of what we have and what we can have and how grateful we are for it.
That's right.
What is average and normal and basic for us isn't for a lot of people.
Yep.
And as a result, I feel privilege isn't the word perhaps, but extra grateful, or maybe really and truly lucky and blessed that the most average thing is happening. And I said this to someone not long ago. We were talking about how hard it is to go to sleep, and how great it is to sleep for more than 5-6 hours a night. And I said, I hear that 100%. And whether or not I have slept well, every morning I wake up, whether it's early or it's late, traffic, bad weather, crazy stuff happening wherever I am, I get to wake up. And that's kind of awesome.
That's right. Now, one of the things I saw that you have that I think is going to be powerful for people since you have gone through this experience, are your 5 tips for surviving and thriving after trauma. which can be applied in so many areas of our lives. So I wanted to talk to you about those. And the first one I have is asking for help is not a weakness, it's a step forward, which we're all about that around here.
Fact, aren't we? I mean, how many remarkable things were done solo? Honestly, when we're truly honest, other than, and even the Bible is written by more than
multiple people, right?
Right? At least that's my understanding of it. When we decide that we can even better with the assistance of others, what we will make is better. What we will do is better. And to give ourselves permission to do it, I think must be learned. I don't think we are born to say, could you help me, please? Some people may be. I know it did not come easily to me.
And you mentioned too that once you apply the courage needed to ask for help, it gets easier.
I think so. And I think it gets easier because the results reflect what we intended to do. And usually the way someone is assisting us, it isn't that much. We're still doing the brunt of the work. We are still making the majority of the effort. Maybe it's the salt or the Aleppo chili to make it taste better.
That's right.
Maybe it's a different frame for the picture. Maybe it's the person who has the key to the door that we are trying to unlock, and all the knocking we're doing ain't doing anything.
That's right.
So solo is great. And usually it isn't the real story.
Now, number 2 is failure or what feels that way can be flipped. What's that mean?
When we flip failure, it's like what Raheem Devon, who was one of my favorite singers, he says, lessons are blessings. And I read that and I thought about it for a while. We learn a lot from what we do. We learn a lot, particularly when it doesn't go the way we hope. It doesn't mean, though, that we aren't learning stuff from it. So what can we derive from that mess up or that disaster or that ball drop? What can we take from that, turn it over, and apply it in the next thing?
Number 3, you say things will never be the way they once were. I'm sure you had to get over that, right?
Fact. So as obvious as that statement may be, and it is an obvious statement because when something radical happens, it's different on the other side. The opportunity to reset when it occurs allows us to pull the best of what we did and make room for what has yet to happen. We also get to abandon what held us back or hurt us, because this space allows for what we're going to learn and make our new normal. Example, let's say something crazy happens and it totally turns over the majority of your social life. The friends you once had, could count on, did everything with, they are less or no longer in your life after the big thing happens. We have choices here. We can regret that. We can chase them. We can do everything possible to figure out what we did to repel them. We can feel guilty for whatever we may have said or done that moved them away. And I did that a lot.
You felt guilty a lot?
Girl, I mean, asking people all the time, did I say something? Did I do something? You know, you didn't call me back. You didn't accept my invitation for this. What I came to realize finally was when you are on pause, when you are going through something that is exclusive to you, other people aren't there. Their lives are still operating at the rhythms that they had been, and they will continue to do as they do. It's not that they don't care. It isn't that they don't love you. It isn't that they're not interested. If it is, so be it. All right. That is far less about you, me, than it is about them.
Mm-hmm.
So
I think that's so important to remember. Yes, people's lives continue to go on even when you're going through a tough time.
Again, that may sound like an obvious thing. And had I realized it at the time, I might have some particular friends in my life still, because I wouldn't be playing the blame game on them, on me. I wouldn't be existing in a place of regret. And, hopefully this is not too familiar to you. When something goes sideways and you spend hours and hours replaying it in your head, what did I do? Who was there? What was said? I lived there. And that is a boring movie. You need to turn that off.
Right.
And
what was
it?
So,
I'm sorry, that's one thing I learned there. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I was going to say, sorry to cut you off.
No, I'm done.
I was going to say, for you, was that because of after the accident? Did you feel like that's when you lost some friends because you were going through the recovery period and they may have been, like you said, gone on with their lives and doing their own thing?
I began to feel, I'm trying to think of the word. Touchy's not the word. I began to feel even more different than I already knew I was, because the people that I had been part of my routine, part of my everyday life, or my occasional get together, they were either impossible to get a hold of or so tricky to get a hold of that I eventually stopped trying. And initially, I was not thinking about any of this. When my mother had kept track of all the people that had visited in the hospitals. And so I sat in their family room for a few days and wrote thank you notes, because I didn't have people's phone numbers, though I had a lot of people from my years at Sephora had come and I knew the stores. So I wrote letters, and in some of the letters, I said, I would love to be in touch. I'd love to reconnect, and thinking that everyone would read that, thinking that they would want that too. And the best thing to do probably would have been for me to have waited a minute before doing that. Not that I shouldn't have shared my gratitude. Everything was so raw. And I was so confused, not only with where I was, but who I was, that I am confident that there were no molehills here, but I made everything a mountain.
Right.
Because it's not, when someone doesn't call you back or doesn't call you back right away, it's not personal.
Right. A lot of times it has nothing to do with you. But like you said, I think too, when you're going through, I would imagine a traumatic experience, and for everyone listening, that doesn't have to be a brain injury or anything like that. Just whatever the hard time is, or the time that you feeling alone or that kind of thing, you think those people, quote unquote, should be there. You never know the reason someone's not calling you back or anything like that. It likely has nothing to do with you. I think, and let me know if you agree, Kate, what is important though is that, okay, if it's not going to be your friends or your family or the people who were there, that you do find some other way to get support for yourself so you don't feel isolated and alone during those times.
Truth. Elayne, truer words never spoken. Whatever environment, whatever program, whatever group, among the reasons that I encourage people to do volunteer work, to find a faith-based community, if that speaks to them. There is something about doing with others.
Right.
It makes for a different experience. And sometimes distraction's not the word. When we can be about making for other people because they need something. I mean, it's supposed to, and I believe it effectively does, take us out of being caught up on our own stuff.
Mm-hmm. Someone tell me, when in doubt, focus out.
Check. Ooh, that's good.
Yeah.
Nice.
So now tell us about number 4, be patient with yourself.
So something I say in my book that I only came to really and truly believe in all of this. Things don't happen on time. They happen in time.
Mm.
And I shared that with someone last year and they said, well, that sounds like a justification. I said, well, I don't know if I'd call it a justification. I'd call it a realization. I mean, this is to people who are not married and they are at an age where people do not appear to be getting married. They have wanted to buy a house and don't have a house yet. They seek Big Ten, Ivy, liberal arts college for their child, and they haven't received all of the application results yet. There are some things we cannot hustle. We cannot speed up.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the rhythm that we go with, and women's rhythms, I think, tend to change a little more frequently than men's rhythms. That's good. And what we want, what we are trying to make happen, that has its own rhythm. That's not going to be at our speed. So let's catch that. And let's do what we are doing and recognize that that thing is doing too.
Mm-hmm. So important. That's something that I will be honest, that I struggle with occasionally, being patient with myself or doing something and thinking this should have worked by now, or this should fill in the blank, right? All the shoulding all over yourself, as they say.
Mm-hmm.
But like you said, trying to rush whatever the process is. Well, you do whatever you can, but then there are some things, and someone just shared this with me, some things that you said go at their own pace. No amount of pushing, striving, as successful women, no amount of whatever you do, excellent, will necessarily, there'll be some point where it's not up to you. It doesn't depend on you. It's outside of you.
Totally. One of the challenges here is seeing other people succeed, excel, accomplish, whether they are in the same business community as us, or they are people we admire, we aspire to be. I was leaving Le Poisson Rouge, which is a concert venue in New York City, seeing a band I really like called Over the Rhine. Mm-hmm. And at the table where they were selling swag and albums, there was a t-shirt, and it said on the t-shirt, "Comparison is the thief of joy." Now, Teddy Roosevelt said that. So I bought that shirt. In fact, I bought 2 of those shirts. And this idea, comparison is the thief of joy. Elayne, I have had that in my mind, and I share that with people on the regular, because what that's saying is not just comparing ourselves to others, comparing ourselves to ourselves, who we thought we might be at age whatever, who we thought we might be after this private equity money comes in, who we thought we might be after we were on a panel with these C-level and exec folks. I mean, we're getting it. We're doing it. And it may not be when we think it's supposed to happen. Doesn't mean it's not going to.
You gotta be patient with yourself.
It's hard. Why is it so hard to be patient with ourselves versus with other people? I ask people this all the time, because I know I'm not the only person that can give those around us and people we love all kinds of latitude. They will get to it.
Right.
Us, we are to wake up, dress up, and show up as perfectly and as powerfully as we can every day.
I think we just have these I know for me, just have these high expectations of yourself. And I love this one, be patient with yourself, because my coach even tells us about that, showing yourself some grace. I've spoken about that on a podcast too. Yeah. The importance of reminding ourselves, show yourself a little bit of grace. be kind to yourself, be loving to yourself. Like you said, it's often, especially as women, as nurturers, for us to, in that case, yes, focusing out, as we said earlier, is great. But then there are times when you have to focus in, take care of yourself in the same way. Now,
it's interesting. Doing that comes, I don't want to say naturally, it comes a little easier for some people. And I was discussing this with a colleague last year, and they said, well, that's because they were raised like that. And I don't know if that's true. I wonder, though, sometimes maybe the seeds for certain things, if they get planted early, then they cultivate longer and perhaps stronger. And that could work. I know for me, to have learned to be nice to myself and not so self-hating, it took a village. Okay. I mean, it took, and I still work on it, and I will probably work on it forever. Between clinical hypnotherapy, traditional therapy, praying, reading, meditating, struggling, asking questions that were embarrassing at the time, and then end of the day knowing I have to have survived what was purportedly to have killed me for reasons other than the medical teams knew what was up and people prayed. There have to be reasons. And so I decided it's not just that the world wasn't done with me. I wasn't done with the world.
That's powerful, Kate. I love that. I love that. All right.
Feel free to share it.
Feel free to share it. I'll give you credit twice.
No, I'm not worried about it. That's not copyrighted.
So number 5, besides fight or flight, there's dealing with it.
So fight or flight, our native responses to trauma, upset, challenge. So when you can't leave and you can't destroy, what's left? For me, it's starting new and knowing that after the battle, after the rabbit hole, there's you, everything you believe and everything you can do. I mean, smack it up, flip it, rub it down. That fact.
Oh my gosh. So why do you think most of us go into, is it just because it's the natural part of us, the flight or fight part of us is just a natural thing we do as opposed to sort of, as you said, standing still and dealing with it?
To stand still and pause and perhaps process further what's happening, at least in the United States, that's a sign of weakness. That's a sign of ignorance or not being aware of how to do it. And thus, there is shame attached to that. And speaking for people I know in the US, people would rather do a lot of stuff than look wrong or incapable or stupid. And sadly, I mean, how many solutions could we have really and truly found if we decided to, all right, brass tacks, what is really happening here?
Right.
Did they mean to hurt my feelings? Is 17 years of friendship about to be thrown out the window because of one thing? I'm trying to think of a work example. If we released this material to the client and the client didn't like it, is that because, we didn't do what the client asked? Is that because the client changed their mind? Is it a combination of both? Do we have opportunity to learn from what we did and do it again, resubmit it? Or is the client a jerk and we sense this from the get, and instead of, finding a way to finesse and draw from them what they really wanted, we were so psyched that they were this big ticket, velvet rope, white glove client that we just bore it because we needed the money and we needed to have that name on our roster, on our website, so we could claim our place in this industry.
Mm-hmm. That's powerful.
And if that's the answer, oh well, we did it. It didn't work. Let's rethink the next time this opportunity comes up.
Right. So in closing, Kate, if you think over your life and career and you had the chance to thank only one person whose support was critical to you personally or professionally, who would that be and what would you say?
Sure. So I would thank William Appling, who was the first music teacher with whom I had the privilege of working in high school. He was the first person who helped me to believe that if I wanted to be someone and do something, I could. Wanting it was the first step. And the tactics, the tricks to that success would follow. Thanks to him, not on purpose, certainly, social justice, civil justice became actionable things in my life and no longer things that I read about and learned about historically and academically and reading about accomplishments and protests in the news. He passed a few years ago, and I'm grateful to know his girlfriend and his daughter and his colleagues. And I know that he heard me say that just now. Mm-hmm. So he is the person I would thank, because when I get down to it, 30 years after I met him, he was and still is one of the greatest influences in my life.
I love it. Beautiful. And I agree with you. He heard you say that.
Thank you.
So what are the ways that we can support you? Tell everyone where to find your book. Of course, I'll have links to it, but just so everybody can hear it again, your website, anything else you want to share with us?
Thanks. My website is kateharvie.com, and that's Harvie. My social handle is GlossGal. I am offering a 50% off my speaker rate for those who buy 30 or more copies of my book. And anyone who buys the book via me, I will sign each of them, personalizing them should someone tell me who's receiving them, and knock 25% off the retail. With book clubs, meetups, there is a lot of conversation that can be had within this book. Plus, she's not very long, which is a helpful thing in our lives today, because we have a lot of information that we must access.
And where can people find your book? Or should they go to your website to buy it from you?
So on the website are links to the easy retailers. My book is available on every retailer.com around the world, and some indie stores. And the easiest is probably to go to Amazon or go to my website on the book page, and the 2/3 down, you click the links and click the widgets and they'll go right there.
Excellent. Kate, thank you so much for sharing your story, your tips, but really your story. And a harrowing story it is, about what you went through, the recovery process, and being willing to share it with everyone in a way that helps them through whatever kind of trauma or experiences they're going through.
Elayne, thank you. And thank you so much for, telling the world in the loudest possible voice that by supporting each other, by helping each other, we make all of us stronger. We make all of us better, because we are better together than by ourselves.
That's right.
And thank you for leading that charge.
Thank you. Now, before you go, what's a parting piece of advice from you to our listeners about anything?
Our most valuable commodity is time. So be sure that you're spending yours where, with whom, and doing what are most important to you.
All right. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Kate. To find out more about her and to find out more about her book, Believe It and Behave It, just go to supportissexy.com, go to that search icon and type in Kate, Kate. Her show notes page will pop up with links, resources, and ways to get in touch with her. We've had a few Kates on our show, so remember it's Kate Harvie. But just go to supportissexy.com and she'll be there. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate you. Until we chat again, always remember, support is sexy, and having it all doesn't mean doing it all alone. And I'll talk to you soon. Take care.